Hello, everybody. Good morning to you. Good afternoon where I am. It is evening, which means that it is right now Rosh Chodesh Adar. And we say when the month of Adar begins, it says in the Talmud, Mishenichnas Adar Marbim B'Simcha, from the moment that the month of Adar arrives, we have the intention of being in a place of profound joyfulness. So on a certain level, that is our challenge and our intention for this next 45 minutes to an hour that we're going to spend together. And let's just be honest, that's a tall order coming off of 2020. Here we are. I was talking to someone who just participated a few hours ago in a meditation on cultivating joyfulness, and we were debriefing afterwards, and she said, like, what joyfulness? Like, what are you talking about? So hopefully with the arrival of the month of Adar and the learning that we're gonna be able to do together during this next hour, hopefully we'll find a way to drop into some of that. The sources that we're going to look at together. Well, first I should say, so we're going to talk and frame a little bit, and then I'm going to spend some time with my screen shared so that you can be taking a look with me at some of the sources that I'll be offering. This source sheet, though, Rabbi Silverstein put together. He is a dear friend and teacher and colleague of mine. And so as soon as I saw this source sheet, I said, no, we have to use this source sheet. It's gorgeous. And so thank you to him for that. And if you've been taking class month after month with him, you know how wonderful he is. And if not, then you should check him out at Applied Jewish Spirituality. He does really beautiful, beautiful teaching. And so I'm grateful to him for generating the source sheet. So I'll share my screen and we'll learn together in that way. And then every little while, we're going to sort of jump around. And so when we finish a page, I'll pause and we'll just take a minute and review the chat and see if there are any questions. And so I really encourage you, write your questions and your insights into the chat, and we'll pause. It's hard. What a beautiful, beautiful thing to know that there's 100 faces here. I can't see all your faces all at once, and it pains me that I cannot hear you. And so at the very least, please, I encourage you to share your insights and your questions in the chat, and we'll just pause at regular intervals, and we'll get your voices into the conversation, even if I'm the one who has to give it voice. So the Torah that we're going to explore together today, in a certain way, I feel that the essence of Judaism is embedded in this Torah that we're going to be exploring. First of all, because what is the function of our religious life if it can't give us a sense of joyfulness and hopefulness when we are in difficult times? But on a much deeper level, there's a beautiful Hasidic saying that says, more than Jews have kept Shabbat, Shabbat has kept the Jews. The idea that were it not for Shabbat, we would not be here. So while I believe there is truth to that, what I want to say is that in a certain way, the Torah that we're going to do together today, I feel that it is even more true, that it is this depth of Torah, the specific, we're going to look at what is Adar, what is the specific type of joyfulness that comes from Purim? And we're going to have a chance as we go to juxtapose Purim and Pesach. And in that juxtaposition between Purim and Pesach, I'm going to say that the power of Judaism and the secret to how it is that Judaism has endured and has been spiritually nourishing for us for 5,000 years or 2,000 years, it's in this juxtaposition, because this joyfulness that we are looking for and going to uncover together by doing Torah around the month of Adar and Purim, this isn't a surface level joyfulness. This isn't like a kind of fake smile, saccharine, oh, just play happy and you'll be happy. This is the type of joyfulness that comes from acknowledging the complexity of the world that we find ourselves in, acknowledging pain, acknowledging evil. All of these things arise in the Purim story. And yet, in spite of the true complexity of what it is to be alive on planet Earth and to be a Jew on planet Earth, in spite of all that, to still find a way to uncover some joyfulness that comes through side by side with all of the complexity. So let's see if we can't get there. All right, I'm going to share my screen. You received the source packet by email. We're actually going to start together on page 3. And so if you had printed mine out, it's always nice. If you have it printed out, you can grab it, but I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to navigate us to the 3rd page of the source packet. And that is where we are going to begin. Okay, so let's just begin by acknowledging we find ourselves here in the Megillah, and whatever happens before the 8th chapter of the Megillah, by the end of the Megillah, the Jew, we arrive at a place of joyfulness, and we have this pasuk, LaYudim hayta ora v'simcha v'sason v'ikar. Now that pasuk should be familiar to you because it made its way into the Havdalah ceremony. So every Saturday night, as we're trying to hold on to the organic joyfulness, the oneg that has been Shabbat, as we're holding on to that and taking a breath and smelling the spices to hold on to our joyfulness, we make this affirmation that comes from Megillat Esther, that the Jews knew and enjoyed tremendous light and joy and happiness and honor. So now Rabbi Daniel gathered for us these beautiful Hasidic sources. And so I want to jump, so we can just quickly read the source from the Pri Tzadik. In truth, it seems that laughter and joy are one matter, except that joy is in the heart, and laughter is the revelation of the joy that is in the heart. So let's just take a minute and see if we can't feel our way into that. Just that difference between that quiet sort of warmth that is joy that rests in the heart, and how it's different than what comes kind of like bubbling out when laughter arises. So just see if you can't feel your way into that. Maybe think back to the last time. Hold on, I have to stop the share to ask you. How many people, well, just raise your hands. How many people watched the lawyer cat thing? Did we watch the lawyer cat thing? Right, okay. So that's like a perfect example of this bubbling up of laughter. If you don't know what I'm talking about, maybe we could find the link. This is a 60-second video, just dear of one person who activated a Zoom filter and another person who had to appear before a judge in a formal hearing who couldn't get the Zoom filter turned off. And so this poor lawyer who had the lawyer as a cat. And it's really wonderful Purim Torah, actually. It's ridiculous and hysterical. So just see if you can maybe think back to, if you watch that or in general, just the last time you found yourself laughing out loud and that bubbling up that comes. So, there's a song lyric, sort of a colloquialism that said, that if you have to laugh, otherwise you would cry. And that colloquialism is really, that's what we're getting at here with Purim. And also in a certain way, I think with this particular here and now that we find ourselves in, on some level, with all of the challenge of the past year, from all different directions, if you don't laugh, you gotta laugh, otherwise you would just cry your eyes out. And so we're gonna keep coming back to that here. So I want to spend a moment on this source from the Bavli Shabbat. Ein Shechina Shurash. The Shechina is the feminine presence of God, the part of God that we can feel right here, right now. The Shechina does not dwell with us. Lo mitoch etzev, v'lo mitoch atzlut, v'lo mitoch schok, v'lo mitoch kalut rosh, v'lo mitoch sicha, v'lo mitoch dvarim b'tilim. The Shechina doesn't dwell with us, not with sadness or laziness or lighthearted frivolity, and not from chit chat, but rather it is only the Shechina comes from the simcha shel mitzvah, that there is a deep simcha. We said that Mishenichnas Adar Malbim b'simcha, that Adar, this month we are in, it's the month of simcha, of a type of deep joyfulness that comes in this, from the Talmud is saying that comes from the doing of a mitzvah. Maybe if you would be so bold with me, take a moment and just write into the chat, if you feel comfortable, something, a behavior in your life, whether it's a mitzvah or otherwise, that it gives you that deeper kind of simcha, not frivolity, but simcha. You know, maybe it's time with grandkids, or a beautiful place in nature, or a family tradition. I'm not going to stop the share to read them. I'm going to read them in a few minutes. Going forward, I want us to look at this source from the Maharal. I'll scroll up for us so we can see. So, adding on to this idea of joyfulness and just how central simcha is, the Maharal of Prague makes a surprising statement. You know, we have a mitzvah in Judaism to pray the Amidah 3 times a day. It's serious. You know, the people who take doing, you know, well, I can just even use an anecdote from Israel, where I live. The population in Israel who guides their lives by with a firm sense of obligation to mitzvot, the entire year of the pandemic, when we really made tremendous sacrifices, at no point in time has the right to gather in a minimum quorum of 10 been denied, because there are some people who take this obligation to say the Amidah in a minyan 3 times a day, that it's as important as any other life-saving measure, right? Now, whether or not that's your view or my view is a different matter, but it is a view held among some members of the Jewish community. And so with that in mind, the Maharal makes a surprising statement. So what he says is that this teaching that we have from Masechet Brachot, that a person should not stand and pray the Amidah except with the joy of connection, for through joy, which is spiritual wholesomeness, the Shekhinah rests on them, and the person will be blessed, will be with the blessed divine. This is a very surprising statement. Not one must pray the Amidah 3 times a day, but rather one should only stand to pray the Amidah from a place of simcha. So that's a tall order. And it shows us how central uncovering resources of joy are. Okay, so now I want to stop the share, and I'm going to look at some of the beautiful things that you all wrote, and I would love to hear some questions. Okay. Julie, why can I see so little of the chat? Okay. It's okay.
I don't know. Do you want me to read them to you?
Well, I see, oh, thank you for putting the cat video. Okay, so I see so many beautiful moments of deep joyfulness, anecdotes from life. I'm not seeing questions. How important is the Amidah? Is that it? Okay, I see that. I'm going to answer that question. Okay, thank you. But Julie, can you just look up and see if I missed any questions? Okay, so it looks like maybe James, I think, is asking how important is the Amidah, and Roni has asked, do we believe that joy is an emotion or a state of mind? Okay, so James, the question, how important is the Amidah? That's a question, it depends on the perspective from which you're asking. The obligation to pray the Amidah is, you know, it's the 2 of the 3 are considered the highest level of obligation we have, obligations from the Torah, and the text of the Amidah, whereas the third is from the rabbis, one step down, and the text of the Amidah is among our oldest of rabbinic Jewish texts. So the skeleton of the Amidah itself is written out for us in the Mishnah, which means that it has pretty high credentials, pretty serious credentials all the way around. And having said that, is saying the Amidah more important than saving a life or giving tzedakah? Like that's a whole shiur. But it is it is important. But what we're seeing here in the source from the Maharal is that it's very important, but it's meant to be a transformational spiritual practice, right? So let's take that as our answer, as our aspiration, that we are meant to stop 3 times a day to drop in to our soulfulness, as opposed to the parts of us that are wrapped up in the rat race of life or place of ego or ambition, and say this formula, which, at least according to the Maharal, is something that should plug us into a sense of joyfulness. So I want to, Roni, hold your question, do we believe that joy is an emotion or a state of mind, until the end, because I think that some of what we're going to explore here might speak to that. But I think already your question, it's an excellent question. On some level, this must be more than an emotion, because certainly in the Hasidic sources, we know that emotions are fleeting. Emotions are like water. They come and they go, they flow in and out, and that's their blessing and their challenge. And yet we're talking about something here that is really textured and really rich. And so maybe more akin to a state of mind. Okay. So we're going to jump now back to page 2, and I'm going to start my share again. All right, but before I do, so Cheryl's asking, could you please share a bit about the Megillah in terms of holding the complex mix of joy, deception, violence, and triumph? Cheryl, if I forget by the last time I stop the share in the chat, and put the question back, because let's see a little bit more, and then yes, we will. That is exactly where we're headed. Beautiful question. Okay, so let's look back now on page 2. Okay, so Cheryl, is a perfect transition. We have this instruction that in the month of Adar, we're meant to have abundance. We're meant to have lots and lots of joyfulness, and yet the joyfulness that arises in the Megillah is one. It's quite related to relief, really, right? This is a joyfulness that comes because it's not just that the people, the Megillah opens with, Joy said it in the beginning, in 2 weeks I'll do a class only on the Megillah, and we'll just be in the Megillah, and we'll look at some of these themes just all from within inside that text itself, so you can come back and we'll do more from there. But so the Megillah opens at a big party, right? So this big extravagant party, that's a certain kind of fun, but that's not the joyfulness that we find at the end of the Megillah. The Megillah ends, the depth of joyfulness that we read in our first quote from chapter 8 is because the Jewish people in the Megillah thought that they were going to die. The context of the Megillah is genocide. It's a genocide that's averted, and thanks to the fact that the genocide was averted, then they are able to experience this tremendous, what we've been calling joy, but what we're saying now is maybe relief. On a deeper level, when I said at the beginning that the power of Judaism is found in the themes that we're talking about here, there is something here about holding the tension of opposites and finding meaning even within the profound reality check that is the Megillah, that is part of the power of Jewish tradition that has served us through all of these stages of history and generations. And that's what we're starting to see here. So this quote that we have from the 9th chapter, we meet the central concept of Purim, which is this idea of nafochu. Nafochu is the deep mitzvah of Purim. So let's see it first on the inside. And so it was in the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, and on the 13th day thereof, when the king's order and their edict drew near to be put into execution, on the day that the Jews' enemies looked forward to ruling over them, it was turned on its head, and the Jews instead it was decreed that the Jews instead should be rule over their enemies. וביום אשר שיברו אויבי היהודים לשלוט בהם, ונהפוכו, and it was reversed. אשר ישלטו היהודים הממית שונאיהם. Sorry. So we have this concept that there is a topsy-turviness here to life. You know, we're talking about laughter. The Yiddish phrase that is translated "man plans, God laughs." There is something here in this story that's about the reversal of expectations, and that if, you know, we said that we're going to talk a little bit about the juxtaposition of Purim and Pesach. So Pesach is all about planning, right? We're going to clean every nook and cranny, and we have very detailed rules. And whereas during the rest of the year, sometimes we have a little bit of exceptions to our rules. On Pesach, there's no exceptions. There's no room for error. Pesach is the holiday of those of us who have OCD tendencies, and it's a chance to just sort of indulge that part of ourselves. And Purim is the opposite. Purim says, you might think that you are in an ordered world, but actually, nafochu. Actually, our expectations, our plans are constantly being turned on their head. And in the context of the Megillah, thank God for that, because a crisis was averted. And on a deeper level, that there's something having to do with joyfulness and with the type of surrender that just acknowledging that we live in a world that is topsy-turvy like this brings. That if we can get to a place that's not I clean every nook and cranny, but rather that the unexpected is constantly happening, and that my joyfulness comes from being able to ride the waves of the unexpected, that there's a richness there that serves us, and that's necessary in some way. Okay, we're going to move forward. So I really debated whether or not I wanted to offer you this source, but I'm going to read it. I don't want us to get bogged down. My favorite work of Jewish mysticism is the Safriatsira, which is our next source here. It is a profound and beautiful work of mysticism, of early Kabbalistic literature, and it speaks about the month of Adar and about laughter. So this quote is in a long line of quotes from Safriatsira, where the book is going letter by letter, the letters as being imagined to be making up the core architecture of all of existence. So look around, and so everything that you see is made up of, we think of this core architecture as maybe being like math. So for Safriatsira, it is math, but it's math that's represented through the Hebrew alphabet. And so this is the statement, that God then made the letter Kuf king over laughter. And God bound a crown to it and combined one with another. So every letter gets these postures. This is sort of a trope. Crown combined one with the other. And with them, he formed Pisces in the universe, and Adar in the year, and the spleen in the soul, male and female. So for Safriatsira, there's a connection between Kuf, which is connected to laughter, which is connected to the astrological sign of Pisces, and the month of Adar, which is now, and the spleen. So we'll leave the spleen for another time. if that's the kind of thing that interests you. You could see I put in the beginning so in my some of my time in my day job, I do the Kabbalah of the body. So we can do a lot of work on the spleen, but for now we'll leave that to the side, and we'll just take from this image. Kuf reminds us of Kuf, a monkey, and the rabbis draw that out when they're interpreting this source. And so there's something here about a monkey-like perspective that's more lighthearted. There's a lightheartedness. The path to joyfulness here and to meaning making here is more lighthearted. Let's go one more. Okay, so here we have this this surprising statement about Purim and Pesach, and it comes again from the Pri Tzaddik. So he's juxtaposing, as we said, Purim and Pesach, and he says, also in the month of Nisan, which is the month of Pesach, there were supernatural miracles, great miracles. So the holiday of Pesach, really central, right? Redemption from Egypt, splitting of the sea, receiving of the 10 Commandments. It's what we think of as like the stuff of Judaism. And yet he says, but the decree of persecution was not inverted to salvation. But in Adar, for Purim, the decree itself was inverted to salvation and darkness to light. And this is the teaching of the letter Kuf. So he's saying that there's something that is even more extreme about the holiday of Purim. It's less traditional, it's less central in Jewish tradition, but there's something very extreme about it, that because we went from certain death to such a flourishing total life, you know, Mordechai in the court of the king and Esther as queen, that the salvation is even more, and the reversal from darkness to light is even more. So I'm going to stop the share, and I'd like to take some questions, but I'm going to start by throwing out a question, especially in light of what we have lived over the course of the last year. I want to invite all of us to think about the ways that these types of extremes of moving from darkness to light, or moving from hopelessness to hopefulness, where that comes up for us, where do we, in what ways do we have personal experience with that? And for me, the question that matters is which is the more appropriate capturing of our life, of our world. Is it like what feels more real for you? The context of Purim, which is what the Pri Tzaddik is saying here, is that we have these extremes of, we have real darkness and real light, and they coexist side by side, or this Pesach narrative, which is the one that we spend more time with over the course of the ebbs and flows of the Jewish year, which is a more wholesome story, the story that we were in a difficult place and we cried out and God heard us and God swept in and took us out like on eagle's wings, and then we were saved, and then we got the Torah. The question is which for you in this moment is feeling like, yeah, that's a snapshot. That's a good snapshot of my own felt sense of what it is to be a human being in the world. So that's my question that I'm going to throw out to you, and I'm going to take a minute and read through some of your questions. And if you'd like to offer an answer to that question in the chat, I would love it. So Betsy is asking, we are commanded when Adar begins, we should heighten our joy. Purim doesn't start until the 15th. How do we manifest joy from Rosh Chodesh Adar? Okay, wonderful, Betsy, thank you. So first of all, we do it by beginning to study and prepare for the holiday. But this original, in the Talmudic sense, the statement's a little bit descriptive, that the essence of the month of Adar, that there is an access to joyfulness that just sort of energetically opens up, and that we have the ability to tune into it and to begin to just sort of tap into it. And wouldn't that be nice? Like right now, I'm talking to you from Israel. Spring has sprung here, and I was outside, and there's just I live in a place with lots of wildflowers, and so looking at just all these, I could see every color of the rainbow all in one little tiny patch of forest, because the springtime sun is shining, and there was this sense of like, wow, the world, things feel better than it felt, a few weeks ago when everything was dark and gray. So not that we are, not just that we have to work for it, but that it's here and we can just sort of breathe it in. Can you explain? So Ray is asking, can you explain the correlation of Yom Kippur and Purim? Great. So really wonderful. So wonderful question. So the rabbis make some fascinating statements about Purim and Yom Kippur as being, so Yom Kippur, we tend to say it in English, we use the Hebrew Yom Kippur, but in Hebrew we can often say Yom HaKippurim. And so there's wonderful Torah that what is Yom Kippur? What is the Day of Atonement? It is the day that is Ke Purim. And surprisingly, the Gemara makes the statement that that maybe in the end of days, it's the Purim pieces of it that are going to stay with us more than the atonement pieces of it. So to go back to the question that I just threw out about this juxtaposition of light and dark and of hopelessness and hopefulness in our lives, this association between Purim and Yom Kippur is playing with the same pieces. When we go deep into our tshuva process on Yom Kippur, the work of tshuva, the work of deep return, which is, kofer, the imagery of the work of atonement that we're doing in Yom Kippur, it comes from the verb of scraping away. We're scraping away these layers of soot that we've gathered up over the course of the year in order to get back to a more organic, natural, this is just plain old me without any of the soot of life that covering my soul. Which is to say, there's profound honesty in the atonement process and profound self-acceptance. This juxtaposition on Purim of hopelessness and hopefulness, we tap into that when we're doing really deep atonement work. I hadn't thought about this until just this minute. I feel a little guilty talking about light and dark in this exact moment of time, because I feel if we were having a conversation about politics, I would say, our world is so painfully polarized, and I don't want to do anything to amplify that sense of it's all black and white. And yet there is something about Purim that brings us into that, and this question of being Kippurim, when we're really, really honest with ourselves and we look deep inside, all human beings, all of us, if we are walking around on planet Earth, it's because we are a messy mixture of light and dark. That's why we're here. And so it's not that we're kind of somewhere in the middle. We are both. We are beautifully, blessedly, splendidly both. And that both light and dark together, all mixed up together, that's Purim. That's Nafochu. This idea of Nafochu, of things being topsy-turvy, turned upside down, we have a very, very, very similar, we have the use of the same verb root when Pirkei Avot, when the Mishnah talks about Torah. When we engage Torah, the Mishnah says, how are we supposed to study Torah? We're supposed to turn it and turn it, hapechba, dekulaba, turn it over, that everything is in it, that this topsy-turviness, this mixture of light and dark, that's how we break open Torah. So not this sort of par of gray both, but really meaning like both as one, but no, it's a weave of light and dark all together. So Susan is offering us that monkey in the Beijing opera. The monkey is a joker signaled by a white patch centered on his face. Jackie Chan was a monkey character when he studied Beijing opera. and a recommendation to see Drunken Ninja. Awesome. And I'm going to add to that in Eastern thought, the monkey, so the monkey god in India, the monkey god is the most widely worshipped god. Hanuman is seen as the god that is most like us. And so there's something, there's a deep resonance there. And also a certain, I don't know if you, I like watching, the research on bonobos is fascinating for us as humans. They're our closest primate relative. But so there's a certain radical honesty with bonobos. Like they're just super happy and super communal. And, they get a lot of talk because they're very sexual. But so that type of monkey essence. And let's see if any questions that I have missed. Yes, so Barry is commenting, in this time of pandemic, the concept that greater sorrow opens up to greater joy, two sides of the same coin, feels more relevant during this time. Okay. So Emma, I'm not sure I understand your question. I'm going to read it out, and then if you want to give a little bit of if you want to ask it again, you're welcome to. Why is Pesach not also operating in these extremes? Is it because it is more of a gradual, drawn out culmination? So Emma, will you put another note in about which extremes you're referring to? Do you mean in the story of Pesach, maybe? And yes, I didn't mean to be bragging. Where it's 13 degrees. Good. And so James offered us the insight that Purim is organized chaos, not just joy for the sake of joy, propelled for the higher purpose. Good. Okay. Shouldn't we all be reaching for white, not drown in the dark? Okay. So Susan asks, shouldn't we all be reaching for the white, not drown in the dark? So I'm going to add a layer that we have in our source packet, and I'll share it again. You have this towards the end of the source packet, but I'm worried about time. I'm just going to speak this for us, but you can look at it in the source packet. So shouldn't we all be reaching for the white, not drown in the dark? So Susan, I accept your question, and I accept the instinct. And, there's an additional layer to the mitzvot around Purim. So the Purim story, which, as I said, is a story of a genocide, the Megillah makes a point of telling us that that Haman's lineage, it tells us he is Haman ha'agagi, the Agagite, and so therefore we know that his lineage goes all the way back to Amalek. And as we're getting ready for the holiday of Purim, we read the section from Torah that mentions Amalek. And in Jewish tradition, Amalek is the symbol of pure evil. And the mitzvah around Amalek it's surprising to me as a person who's on the spiritual path with Judaism as my guide. The mitzvah around Amalek is that we are commanded we have to remember to wipe out the memory. Don't forget not to forget, or don't forget, remember to forget. So these mitzvot around Amalek, it gets to the, we could do a whole class around Amalek and around really what it is we're being commanded to do here. But Susan, I think what it says in response to your question is that while, yes, I agree with you, we should be cultivating light, going towards light. Part of the essence of Purim and part of the texture of the joyfulness that we hope is arising on Adar has to do with seeing the world as it is. That there's something here almost, it's the opposite of aspirational. It's like the joy that comes from the relief of realism. that is part and parcel of this holiday. And so as hard as that is, this Torah is challenging us to take that on, to say, can I cultivate faith? Can I tap into joyfulness, even acknowledging that there's also darkness here? Okay, really wonderful. James, I'm not going to read that question out. So really wonderful the answers that some of you are offering one another here in the chat. Before we, we're moving towards the end of our time, and I want to make sure that we have time for questions. I want to add one last layer for us here. So, okay, so I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so I really encourage you to sit with the source packet and to just enjoy this beautiful collection of sources that Daniel pulled together for us. In these last 3 pages, we have one last layer here, which is this claim that on a certain level, the highest levels of understanding can only be accessed when we transcend the rational. That the rational mind, that the way that we sort of go about constructing our religious life, where we have a sense of order, and this is what I have to do, and I have my instruction, and I follow my instruction, that can only take us so far. But that if we want to go all the way to the level of Ein Sof, then we have to get there by going beyond the rational. So let's look at this quote here from Rabbi Nachman, and I'm on page 8. Know that there is a light which is above our life force, spirit and soul. And this is the light of the Ein Sof. And even though our intellect cannot grasp it, our thoughts keep pursuing it. By pursuing it, our intellect is able to partially grasp it with the quality of what the Zohar calls reaching but not reaching. We get glimpses only. For in truth, it's impossible to grasp, for it is above life force, spirit and soul. And know that it is impossible to grasp even with the quality of reaching but not reaching, except through performing the mitzvot with joy. So this posture of joy, which we're cultivating in Adar, and which is the essence of Purim, Rabbi Nachman is making the claim that it is the path to the very, very highest or very, very deepest levels of understanding that we can possibly attain. And so again, if we're juxtaposing Purim and Pesach, that if on Pesach we have the careful observance of detail-oriented mitzvot, Rabbi Nachman is saying that only takes us so far. That if we want to go the full distance, if we want to get to that light that is beyond all light, that it's joyfulness that can take us there, and that's joyfulness that takes us there. I want one more source. You can take a look at the great source from the Meor Naim right above this, which is sort of like our version of Socrates, but there's one piece that we're missing. Okay, I've lost track of where it is in the source packet. Okay, so let's begin to pull these themes together. So the month of Adar in general, and the holiday of Purim, it's about we have 3 layers here. Maybe I wanted to, okay, well, we'll do it in the summer. It's about 3 layers. On the simplest layer, Mishanichnas Adar Marbim B'Simcha, we have the cultivation of joyfulness. There's just almost like the if you study astrology, that astrology comes, that energy opens, and just additional access to joyfulness existentially during the month of Adar, now that the month of Adar has arrived. That's the first layer. The second layer is the layer of nafochu, that things are never what they seem. You know, the Megillah is a book that God is never explicitly mentioned. The only time the word Esther is mentioned in the Chumash, in the Torah, is when God is telling us that one day God will hide God's face. So this is a book where if God is here, God is only behind the scenes, and it's only by engaging in this topsy-turvy way, turning things over on their head, that we can find what looks to us like traditional Judaism, namely a God that's here and that's showing up like we have in Pesach. So na'afochu, things being turned over, and that in the Megillah itself, it's that the unexpected salvation that comes, that we thought we were facing certain death, and then we were saved in the end, and we were saved in the end even when God, in a context when God is hidden. And then the this last layer, that on a deep spiritual level, that it's in this context of nafochu, what on a path that is a path of joy, that those are the ways we really get to these heights, the source of light that is even beyond soul, that can take us further than the rational mind can take us. And so the last source that I was looking for, you know, we don't do justice to talking about Purim if we don't talk about this really surprising instruction that we have to, what we call to is ad shelo yada, right? So this instruction that at least for some people, if it's safe and not for alcoholics, that there's this instruction to maybe imbibe enough liquor that we lose our sense. The way that the Talmud says it is that we lose the sense of the difference between Haman's evil and Mordechai's blessedness. And so this takes nafochu to a real extreme, that on this one day of the year, if all the other 364 days of the year in Judaism is this source of ethical monotheism that's telling us this is a tradition that helps us to know the difference from right and wrong, on this one day of the year, somehow we acknowledge that the world is topsy-turvy, and that there is a little bit of evil inside of all good and a little bit of good inside of all evil, and that this day is about tapping into that, and that somehow that tapping into that is connected to a deep sense of joyfulness. And so the way that I'd like to tie it together for us is to go back to this idea of self-acceptance, that each of us walking around here on planet Earth, we are a mix of these things, that each of us has a tiny shred of Haman inside of our aspiring to be like Mordechai, and that there's a little bit of bad in all good and a little bit of good in all bad, and that there's something about radical acceptance of who we are in our mishmash of us, and also the world too, that the world is this blend of good and evil and of light and dark, that it's the acceptance of that makes space for this upwelling of deep joyfulness, we hope. So I'm going to leave it there. I'm going to take a look and just see if there's other questions. And if you have questions about any of these sources or any of these ideas, please write them in. Okay. Okay. So Betsy asked, what, if anything, does Adar mean? So the names of the Hebrew months are actually taken from the Babylonian tradition. I am not aware of a Jewish source that gives us, but I could just not be aware of it. So if one of you knows, you should write it in. of a Jewish source that gives a meaning of the month name? Yes. Okay. The actual citation for where, so Betsy asked for the citation of where Esther is referenced in the Torah. So Betsy, if you stay on with me, once we say goodbye, I'll put it in. It's in the book of Deuteronomy, but I have to look up the actual pasuk chapter and verse for you. But in the it's in a prophecy section of, Julie, you're gonna look it up for us. It's in a prophecy section of Deuteronomy where God is saying that there will come a time that I will hide my face. And the phrase that's used for I will hide my face is Esther hastir et panai. I will hide my face. Esther meaning I will hide. So Cheryl asked, is this aligned to the teachings of having both Yetzer Hara and Yetzer HaTov? So Cheryl, yes, I think it's very resonant with this idea that all human beings have both a good inclination and an evil inclination. And you know, when the rabbis talk about the good and the evil inclination, they say some very surprising things, but most certainly they say unequivocally that we need the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, as much as we need the Yetzer HaTov, and that it is part of what makes the world go round. They tell a story that for a moment God toyed with the idea of removing the Yetzer Hara, the inclination towards, I don't like the translation evil inclination, the inclination towards being naughty from the world, and chickens stopped laying eggs. That's how they say it. Yes, so what we are talking about here is very similar to that Donna is saying. It's like the symbol of the Tao, the dot of dark on the light side and the dot of light on the dark side, yin yang. So Olivia, maybe you're saying that you looked up in Jastro that Adar means cloudy. That's interesting. So Barry was reflecting that it's very Jungian, that all the archetypes live within us, the archetype of Haman and Mordechai and Esther, definitely. Thank you, Olivia, for dropping. Olivia dropped the Jastro, the translation of the word Adar in. Let's see if I've missed any other questions. Thank you. So Julie pulled the Histel Panim verse for us from Deuteronomy 31. And Adir does mean strength, yes. Okay, so I think if there aren't any other questions, we are going to close there. I would love to have the opportunity in just a little bit more than 2 weeks to open the Megillah together. You know, all the themes that we began to touch on today are just extended in the Megillah itself, because the genre of the Megillah is satire. The genre itself is farce, and through farce we end up with really beautiful, beautiful Torah.